Welcome to Educate, Inform, and Challenge. My name is Teresa MacLennan. I'm the Executive Director of the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie. We are so glad that you are here with us today. Before we begin, we do want to acknowledge our Indigenous partners and culture and history. We thank you for allowing us to share in this space and to have conversation on these lands. We want to work towards allyship and partnership. We thank you. The purpose and goal of our show, of course, is to talk about the lives and experiences of women. We talk about women in leadership, gender equity, the experiences of women of sexual violence and all types of violence, really, and how we can encourage more women to be in positions of leadership and decision making. So we appreciate that our community comes along with us on these journeys to have these conversations so that we can educate, inform, and challenge our thinking. So today I am thrilled to welcome my guest, Jean. And Jean is a long-term employee here of the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie, who does incredible work in many different capacities. Welcome, Jean. And I'm going to throw it over to you, and maybe you could just tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, your journey here at the shelter, and the work that you do.
Thank you, Teresa. Hello. My journey at the shelter is about 15 years now, and I started as a relief worker in the front line, and then I was a frontline women's counselor for about 14 years. And have just transitioned into this new role of the Outreach Counsellor as of last June. So we're in our 9th month now, and I'm just amazed at the newness of and the ability to help women in a different way.
Amazing. And so you're in this counseling role, very specific role here at the shelter. And I'm sure that you pulled from all of your years of learning and supporting women who come into our shelter because they have fled violence. With all of that knowledge and history and experience, Jean, can you talk to us about the deep-rooted journey for women who have experienced violence and just how complex that can be for so many women?
Absolutely, Teresa. It is a very in-depth scenario where many of our society don't necessarily recognize just how deeply rooted it is. It reaches far and wide because it's really based in our systemic knowledge of patriarchy and how our society has been built on how women were basically seen or still seen as the weaker gender. And so what do we do with that? We can say that we see that in media. We can see that in the entertainment industry. We can see it in social media, in our systems. But what happens for women is that they experience it through the legal system. They experience it through their workplaces. They experience it through their relationships. And the complexities often begin from childhood. So it's rooted in our family systems. It's how our parents taught us what relationships look like. And often not by word, often by view. We see our first relationships when we're kids as being our parental relationships and our grandparent relationships. And we learn from there. And then we take those out into our larger community when we go to school, and then we begin to develop whether they're toxic or healthy relationships. And the messages that we receive through childhood and then through those we develop in our community lead us to sort of believe in our self-esteem and our self-worth. And so women of the community that we service at the shelter are often what they've learned through childhood and are perpetuated through their relationships are a low self-worth, a low self-esteem, that they're constantly told when they're not believed that they are less than, that they are making things up. So the complexity reaches far and wide. People often say, why don't you just leave him? It is the most complex question because they have to think of finances, they have to think of their work, they have to have someone believe them. And so what that can lead to is poor coping mechanisms because they don't necessarily feel that they can leave. So that's poor mental wellness issues. It can be drugs and alcohol, so addiction issues to try to cope with all of that is happening. And it's a very complex issue. It's certainly not one faceted for sure.
So I want to just clarify, because there was something that you said that I thought is just really, really good to note. And that was that, let's say poor parenting, or just upbringing, influences how we feel about ourselves, but also influences how we feel about others. And then, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but that may lead to women making choices in, let's say, a partner that is, the writing is on the wall. There's a lot of red flags. It's not going to be a healthy relationship because what they're used to is not a healthy relationship. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely, Teresa. It is repeated throughout my conversations with the women that I support that they may have seen the red flags that we discuss. They may have seen from the get-go that the partner she chose was controlling and manipulating, and that she didn't say goodbye or she didn't move on. And maybe she told her mom and her mom said, don't worry, that's the way that men are. Or maybe she felt she had to stay because she was pregnant and there was no family or friends to support her. And people often say things like, well, maybe he just had a bad day. And so if she viewed her parents to be in an abusive situation, or her mother still is an abused woman, may not see or support her leaving or show her that they are red flags and to run the other direction. So yes, many women say that they've seen the red flags right off the bat and think that it's normal, think that that is the way relationships go. They didn't question it, they didn't know to.
And I really like that clarity that you offered, because it is not always that a woman has grown up in a family setting that wasn't great, because there's lots of women who, I mean, we know 1 in 3 women have an experience of some sort of violence. And we know that, the majority of us grow up in loving, caring homes, but that doesn't mean that we can always identify a potential abuser and the red
Absolutely.
flags, right? And so I think that is really good clarity, because recognizing those red flags can be difficult for any woman.
Mhm.
How does that translate to women who've been in one abusive relationship? Do you think that they are more keen to recognize those red flags, or could there be a more of a potential to actually fall back into a similar relationship?
There's certainly a potential for sure. And I do support several women that have been in multiple abusive relationships, even marriages, because there's a need for counseling sort of in between. So to help teach a woman what those healthy relationship signs are, because they often feel, and I go back to the patriarchy, we often feel that women in society have been the fixers, they're the caregivers. We have to give and give and give until there is nothing left. And so these women often feel that it is their fault or their problem. They just didn't do it well enough. And so they can perpetuate the same problem with the next relationship. And they often see it as, this is my next opportunity to try to fix it again. Or maybe it's me who's attracting these people, and it's something that I need to fix about me so that this stops happening.
Mhm. And I wanted to start to talk to you about the barriers, the systemic barriers. Maybe you talked about court processes, but also the personal barriers. And I think you've definitely talked about some of them, but would you like to say more about that? Because, what are the barriers that hold back women from having successful, healthy, productive relationships with people?
Well, again, Teresa, I will say that it is rooted in childhood. So we develop, that's our first sense of community, is our family of origin. And so we take those ideas and we go out and we sort of test them on our new community of school and then life and going forward. And if this is the way that our family of origin operates, we don't necessarily think that it's faults within us that we have to fix. We think, oh, it might be them, or it might be me, and I don't know. So what happens often is that the repeat of learning the lesson until someone is able to sort of flag and say, hey, maybe trying it a different way, or maybe seeing it in a different way might be helpful. And so
do you see women for I mean, I know you're relatively kind of really not new to this role, but
mhm.
do you see women for a long period of time? And is it because they may also have a fear of beginning a new relationship with someone?
Well, I think, well, yes, I do see women for some women a long period of time, although the program is definitely short-term solution focused geared. Um, so we sort of talk about a 10 to 12 week sort of connection. Some women need less because they're already very far along on their journey, and they just need some encouragement and someone to believe in them and someone to repeat back those pieces of validation. They just need to hear from someone else. But also, yes, I see some women for a longer period of time, sometimes going on 6 months, because they do have a fear of taking these pieces and going to the next relationship. Often some people swear off relationships in total because they just see a negative pattern, things that they feel are attached to them. So counseling is a process for me and for them together to work on how they can see themselves in a different light, and how, if there's something about themselves or the way they view the world that they don't like, or they feel is toxic and brings in toxic things, that we can work through change, and then they can develop a better self-worth. And so that they can, instead of continuously looking forward and dragging that baggage with them, that they can, backward, they can take the new tools forward and get themselves onto a better journey of healthier relationships.
And I really appreciate what you're saying, Jean. And we're going to dive in more about just how you do that and how you help women through that journey. I think it is really important also to highlight for our viewers, we are talking about counseling for women. We are a women-centered service provider for women only, except our court support does provide support to men and services to men. So Jean's role is in providing counseling to women and to help them to understand their experience of violence, that upbringing like Jean spoke about. But we also value and know that we do not blame and place shame on women who have an experience of violence, and we do not think that they are in any way responsible for that. The counseling services are to help her to understand what has happened to her and put it into perspective, and how does she move through that for future relationships. What we always say is that we need to lift the veil and not be talking about why women decided to do the things that they did, but why did the abuser do what he did? And so that might be a good place for us to end off before we head into a commercial. And when we return, we're going to carry on this fabulous conversation with Jean. We're really going to unpack how it is that she goes about to support women, the successes that she sees, the challenges for sure. And so we really do hope that you stay with us as we dive in deeper with Jean, and just to talk about the counseling supports that are available to women in our community who have had an experience of violence. Please stay with us. We will be right back. So welcome back to Educate, Inform, and Challenge. We're having a great discussion today with my friend Jean, who is talking about the counseling supports that she offers to women who have had an experience of violence. I want to circle back. We were talking briefly about some of the barriers that make it difficult for women to be able to move with and through that journey of violence. And Jean, how significant does mental health play a role in the challenges for women to leave violence, to be able to work through the violence that they've experienced. Can you speak to us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think mental wellness is a facet of a woman's life that can come from two angles. One, where there's a pre-existing scenario, and then also one that can be created from the violence that she's experiencing. And people often see violence or think of a violent relationship when they think of physical physical harm being placed on someone, where it's so very important to understand the mental health issues here, because the more deviant the abuse, the more manipulation and control, psychological and emotional abuse that happens. If a woman has a pre-existing condition that may or may not being treated, that she may not be able to see the lines. She may be able to see that this is her fault, because the abuser may point to her mental wellness as being a weakness, or make her less than, not believed. No one will believe you. No one cares about you. No one else would put up with you. See all of the baggage that you come with, type thing. And it might feed into the negative things she feels about herself. And then there's also depression and anxiety that can be created as a result of the experience of abuse, or that can be added on to a previous condition that someone has. So there's a complexity of multiple things going on. And often women won't necessarily tell their doctor what they're experiencing. So their mental health goes unchecked and undiagnosed and then unhelped. And so it creates a myriad of problems. So say she may find the strength to leave the relationship, then she may deal with systems like CAS or the legal system. And then if she has undiagnosed or unattended to mental health issues, then sometimes these systems, they don't see the complexity or the context of the abuse. The woman can often be blamed, and she can become a victim of a whole other can of worms. That's just a domino effect of the original abuse. And until she is able to have that seen to and treated, quite often it spirals. It can create, again, addiction issues and all kinds of different things, and sometimes lead to suicide or homicide, because the circumstances it's just too much to bear for her.
And I think you brought up another good point, and that is the use of substances. And we have an understanding about why women may use substances, especially that intersection of substance use and an experience of violence. Can you speak to that? Like, what do we know about why women would need to use substances?
Well, again, the domino effect and the perpetuation of what it is that they feel about themselves. So these negative messages that they aren't worthy, that nobody else would put up with them, they can't get a job, they aren't employable, they're lazy, they're no good. All of these messages that are given. So oftentimes when they begin to use as a coping mechanism, then again, that adds another layer of problem. So if they're too drunk or too high to work, or let's say en route to work, they're intoxicated and they get stopped for a DUI. There's all kinds of scenarios that can come up for a woman that now, when we add the layer of abusive substance, that now she has to deal with so much, again, making it much more difficult for her to actually leave the partner, because he's made it so that she feels she's completely unable to.
And I think from a trauma-informed lens, we would say that for women who've had an experience of violence, who then use substances to be able to cope with that, in terms of diminishing any judgment on those women, what we understand is it's not about the woman's behavior or what she's done. It's about what's happened to her. And I think that that's the trauma-informed lens that we always try to put to the work that we do in supporting women through that journey from violence. So I thank you for that clarity, because we do support a considerable amount of women who have the complexities of mental health and also substance use. And we try to support them, of course, from that harm reduction lens, just about how they can use safely until they're in a different place, perhaps to not use any longer. So I want to switch gears. I have a quick question about co-parenting, because I'm sure that you see women for counseling who have left their abusive partner, but there's children involved. And they are trying to navigate, how do I co-parent with someone who was abusive towards me? Can you just talk to us about how complex that can be and just how you try to help women navigate through that?
It is perhaps one of the most complex things that we discuss in our sessions, because women often note that that's one of the biggest disappointments about leaving an abuser. So they cheer themselves, their community cheers them, they've done hard work, they've left, maybe they've waited 2 years, for example, to get rent geared to income housing, they're situated, they've got a job, and they're still being abused. And so it's a re-victimization, as you say, from the trauma-informed approach. We say the trauma is still continuing. So what the recognition that the realization that she sees that she's left, and although she no longer has to deal with the face-to-face on a daily basis, she certainly deals with partners, for example, or exes that don't follow court agreements. So we all assume that judges, when they make agreements or when they make orders, that they assume that the citizens follow them. And that is not the case. So again, women feel that they go through the court process. They've now got an agreement. They have a legal binding agreement in their hands. So they go off feeling confident, to only feel that some of the men of the women that I support are $30,000 or $50,000 in arrears with child support. And the men don't always follow what the judge's orders are. So they walk through their access visits. One woman was describing to me, laid up in bed with COVID, had a serious case of COVID, and her ex dropped the kids off on the doorstep because he had nothing left to do with them. So he dropped them off, and there she was, sick with COVID, expecting the kids to be gone for an additional week. And there she was, stuck because there's no recourse. So although she has a court order, great. So she calls the police because he's not following the order, and the police say, well, in the best interest of the children, can you take them? Because the police are trying to make the best out of the situation that they come to, but it doesn't help the woman. So she's ticked all the boxes. She's gotten herself safe housing. She's gotten herself out. She's gotten a court order. She's gone through that. Sometimes that's 2 or 3 years. And so what can happen is that she's consistently re-victimized. So what I try to work and support the women through is really learning about that lens that they can change. What is within their control? Because his power, or what he does, what his chosen behavior is, how he chooses to view the world, she can't change that. What she has power and control over are her own thoughts and her own choice of behavior. She can't change those things, but what she can do is she can sort of maneuver around what she has and make the best of what she can. And so one of the first things that she can do is change the messages in her head so that she doesn't hear his voice any longer, that she is able to see herself as strong, see herself as worthy, and perhaps even see him as weaker, as the issue that he needs to fix himself. And the farther away she gets from hearing his messages in her head, the better off that she will be. So it is a very complex scenario because, again, we have in our systems these views of what a woman should do and what's at her fingertips, but the complexity of once that's established, I mean, many women, unless they're supported by our own program, for example, or a lawyer that is aware may not be informed that a judge needs to stamp the order that it's enforced by police, because they think they have a court order, so they think that they're solid. But if it doesn't say enforced by police, if they call police, sometimes police don't follow the order because it doesn't say police enforceable. So it's a very complex re-injuring scenario. And when we look at that trauma-informed approach, we just have to continue to tell women that we believe them, validate their stories, tell them that we see them, and help build actual personal tools that they can use to help themselves through these situations, point them in the direction of places that can help them so that they can develop a community of resources. And a lot of that too can just be friends and family that they can go to for support and help. But we are definitely one of those places that women are able to call to get that boost and that knowledge if they don't know where to turn next. And so I often hear about, actually, some women actually even laugh at the term co-parenting, because they're often parenting on their own, sort of on the side of someone, because there is often no co-parenting that exists, because often these abusers, they don't see the value in the woman's parental skill or ability, doesn't walk the walk with her, walks his own walk. And often that's different than what she's trying to teach on the healthy spectrum. So she often feels she's alone.
That was great information, Jean. I mean, we started to talk about co-parenting, and also you interwove in just really how it is that you work with a woman in terms of supporting her. If there's a woman, a young girl who's watching right now, they're living in abuse, they're not sure what to do, what would you say to that woman to encourage her and to seek support?
You are worthy and you do not deserve to be treated terribly. There is help out there, and our agency is the first stop. So our crisis line number at 705-728-2544, counselors 24/7 who will answer the phone. And that's your first stop, because they know all of the different things that can help you out and who they can point you in the direction of support. We believe you and we will help and support you.
We want women to call our crisis line. There isn't anything that you are going to say to us that we have not heard before. And there is no judgment, there is no shame. You are not responsible for the violence that you have experienced. We understand how that can happen. We also receive calls from women that may just want to talk to us because they don't know what they've been living in is actually violence. Please give us a call. We really thank our community for joining us today. We hope that this has educated, inspired, and challenged you and all of our thinking. Thank you, and we will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.